The city bustled with the familiar hum of morning life. Cars honking in traffic, pedestrians rushing along the sidewalks, and the distant hiss of coffee machines brewing for eager customers. Among the crowd was Dr. Maya Brooks, a poised and confident black woman in her late 30s. Dressed in a crisp navy blazer and holding a leather briefcase, she exuded an air of quiet authority as she walked briskly toward her destination, a conference hall where she was scheduled to deliver a keynote speech. Maya had worked hard to reach this point in her career. As one of the youngest federal judges in the state, she was no stranger to adversity, having faced countless challenges to prove her competence in a world that often judged her by appearances before her actions. But this morning, something unexpected lay ahead. As Maya waited at a pedestrian crossing, a police cruiser pulled up beside her. Inside sat Officer Dean Carter, a man in his early 40s with a stern face that bore the marks of years of cynicism. Carter glanced out the window and immediately zeroed in on Maya, his eyes narrowing. She hadn't done anything suspicious, but to him, her confident stride and tailored outfit didn't quite fit the neighborhood. Suspicion simmered as Carter adjusted his hat and stepped out of the car. "Ma'am," he called out, his voice laced with authority. "May I have a word with you?" Maya turned calmly, her brow furrowing slightly. "Good morning, officer. Is there an issue?" Carter approached her with a practiced sternness, his hand resting near his utility belt. "You match the description of someone we're looking for," he said flatly. "I'll need to see some identification." Maya's heart sank. She had heard stories like this before, stories of black professionals mistaken for criminals, their dignity stripped away in public. But this time, it was happening to her. She inhaled deeply, steadying herself. "Officer, I'm on my way to work. May I ask what this is about?" Carter's expression hardened. "I asked for your ID, ma'am. Are you refusing to cooperate?" Maya opened her bag, retrieving her wallet. She held her driver's license out to him with a steady hand, her voice calm but firm. "Here's my identification. I'm Judge Maya Brooks." The words seemed to hang in the air, but Carter didn't flinch. Instead, he barely glanced at the ID before responding dismissively. "We'll need to verify this. Step over here, please." The officer's tone and demeanor drew the attention of nearby pedestrians, some pausing to watch the scene unfold. Maya felt the weight of their gazes, but refused to let her composure falter. "Officer," she began, her voice measured, "I've complied with your request. I'd appreciate it if you could tell me why I'm being detained." Carter's impatience grew. "You'll get your answers soon enough," he said tersely, gesturing toward his cruiser. "Step inside." As Maya hesitated, weighing her next move, the scene grew tense. The murmur of onlookers became louder, a mix of curiosity and concern. Carter, noticing the crowd, placed a hand on her arm. "Let's go," he said. Maya stood her ground, her voice steady but resolute. "Officer Carter, I am not resisting, but I also know my rights, and you've yet to explain why you're detaining me." The murmurs of the growing crowd began to swell, their curiosity morphing into quiet disapproval. A young woman in the crowd discreetly pulled out her phone, recording the interaction as Maya stood unwavering, her calm demeanor contrasting sharply with Officer Carter's growing frustration. "Ma'am," Carter said, his voice dropping an octave, "this isn't a debate. I'm giving you a lawful order." Maya met his gaze, her voice measured. "And I'm asking for an explanation, Officer Carter. As a federal judge, I have an obligation to ensure that procedures are followed lawfully, even for myself." The mention of her title caused a flicker of doubt to cross Carter's face, but his pride refused to let him back down. "Judge or not," he snapped, "you're obstructing an investigation. Get in the car." Maya clenched her jaw, but before she could respond, another voice cut through the tense air. "Excuse me, officer. What's going on here?" Both Carter and Maya turned toward the voice. A middle-aged black man in a neatly pressed suit stepped forward, his expression firm but calm. He carried an air of quiet authority that immediately shifted the dynamic. Carter's irritation flared. "Sir, stay out of this. This is official police business." The man didn't waver. "I'm District Attorney Marcus Hayes," he said, his tone clipped, "and you're detaining a federal judge. I suggest you explain yourself, immediately." The crowd gasped audibly, their murmurs growing louder. Carter's face paled, but he quickly masked it with a scowl. "She matches the description of a suspect," he said defensively. "I'm doing my job." Hayes raised an eyebrow. "A suspect? Judge Brooks? And what crime exactly is she accused of committing?" Carter faltered, his confidence unraveling under the DA's scrutiny. "She fits the profile," he mumbled, his voice losing its edge. "I'll need to verify her identity." Hayes folded his arms, his sharp gaze cutting through Carter's defenses. "You've had her identification in your hand this entire time. What exactly are you waiting to verify?" The tension in the air was almost palpable. Carter glanced at the crowd, now openly recording and whispering among themselves. He shifted uncomfortably, realizing he was losing control of the situation. Maya, still standing tall, spoke up, her voice calm but pointed. "Officer Carter, I've complied fully with your requests. I believe we both know that this detainment has no basis. I'd advise you to release me." For a long, excruciating moment, Carter didn't move. Then, reluctantly, he stepped back and handed Maya her ID. "You're free to go," he muttered, his voice barely audible. The crowd erupted into quiet applause, their relief and approval evident. Carter shot them a glare before retreating to his cruiser, his pride visibly bruised. As he drove away, the tension slowly dissipated, leaving behind a mix of anger and triumph among the onlookers. Maya turned to Marcus, her expression softening. "Thank you," she said sincerely. "I didn't expect to see you here." Marcus smiled faintly. "I couldn't just stand by and watch. Besides, this city needs to see that there are people willing to stand up for what's right." Maya nodded, her resolve unshaken. "This isn't the end of this," she said quietly. "People like Carter need to be held accountable. This can't keep happening." Marcus's smile widened. "You're right, Judge Brooks. Let's make sure it doesn't." As the crowd dispersed, murmurs of the incident continued to ripple through the street. Maya and Marcus stood together for a moment, the gravity of what had just happened settling between them. Maya glanced at the recording phone still pointed in her direction, knowing that this incident was far from over. She turned to Marcus, her voice calm but resolute. "This can't be brushed aside, Marcus. It's not just about me, it's about everyone who's faced this kind of treatment without anyone to speak for them." Marcus nodded, his expression serious. "You're absolutely right. We can't let this slide. Carter's behavior is not only unprofessional, but a blatant misuse of authority. I'll make sure this is looked into." The next day, Maya's office was inundated with messages. The video of the incident had gone viral overnight, sparking outrage and conversations across the city. Messages of support flooded in, along with calls from journalists and activists eager to amplify the story. Maya sat at her desk, scrolling through the comments. Some were empowering, others disheartening, but all of them underscored a single truth: people were paying attention. A soft knock at her door broke her concentration. Her assistant peeked in, holding a stack of papers. "Judge Brooks, the media is asking for a statement. Do you want me to prepare something?" Maya shook her head. "No need. I'll handle it myself." She stood, smoothing her blazer. "If they want a statement, I'll give them the truth." Later that afternoon, Maya stood at a podium, the courthouse steps crowded with reporters and supporters. Cameras flashed, and the murmur of anticipation filled the air. She took a breath, her gaze sweeping the crowd. "Yesterday, I experienced something that far too many people in this city endure every day. It was humiliating, unjust, and, sadly, not surprising. What happened to me isn't unique. It's part of a pattern, a system that allows bias and prejudice to thrive. The crowd hushed, hanging on her every word. "But here's the difference," she continued, her voice unwavering. "I have a platform to speak out, and I intend to use it. Not just for myself, but for everyone who has been silenced, ignored, or dismissed. Change doesn't happen by staying silent. It happens when we confront injustice head-on." Applause erupted, the energy in the air electric. Maya stepped back from the podium, her heart pounding. As she descended the steps, Marcus approached, his expression proud. "Well said," he remarked. "Now the real work begins." Behind the scenes, Maya and Marcus began a concerted effort to address systemic issues within the police force. They compiled reports of misconduct, worked with advocacy groups, and pushed for policy changes to ensure accountability and fairness. Their fight wasn't easy. There were setbacks, resistance, and moments of frustration. But Maya's determination never wavered. She reached out to those who had shared their stories of injustice, amplifying their voices and ensuring they were heard. With every step forward, the movement grew stronger, fueled by a collective desire for change. Weeks turned into months as Maya's fight against systemic injustice gained momentum. Public attention on Officer Carter's actions sparked broader discussions about policing practices and racial bias. Communities across the city began to rally behind Maya's cause, sharing their own stories of mistreatment and demanding reform. Maya and Marcus became a formidable team. Together they organized town hall meetings, bringing together community leaders, activists, and law enforcement officials. These meetings served as a platform for open dialogue, often heated but always necessary. Maya believed in the power of conversation to spark change, even if progress was slow. One day, during a particularly packed town hall, Maya stood at the front of the room, listening as a young black woman recounted her own encounter with racial profiling. The woman's voice cracked with emotion as she described how she'd been stopped and searched on her way to work, left feeling humiliated and powerless. When the woman finished, Maya stepped forward, her voice steady and full of empathy. "Your story is one of so many," she said, her eyes scanning the room. "But together, our voices are stronger. Change doesn't come overnight, but it starts with people like you, brave enough to speak out, to demand better." The room erupted in applause, the energy palpable. Marcus leaned over, whispering, "You're a natural at this, Maya. People are listening because they trust you." Maya smiled faintly. "They trust the truth, Marcus. I'm just a messenger." Meanwhile, Officer Carter faced his own reckoning. The video of his encounter with Maya had prompted an internal investigation, and the findings were damning. It wasn't just his treatment of Maya. There were years of complaints against him, swept under the rug by a system that protected its own. The department was left with no choice but to place Carter on administrative leave, pending disciplinary action. For the first time in his career, he found himself on the other side of public scrutiny, his authority stripped away. Carter's downfall sent a clear message. Accountability was no longer optional. Maya's efforts were beginning to bear fruit, but she knew there was still much work to be done. One evening, after a long day of meetings, Maya sat in her office poring over reports. The door creaked open, and Marcus stepped in, carrying 2 cups of coffee. "You're still here?" he asked, setting one down on her desk. Maya glanced up, exhaustion etched on her face. "There's always more to do," she replied, "but I can't let up, not now." Marcus took a seat across from her, his expression thoughtful. "You've done more in a few months than most people do in years. Don't forget to take care of yourself, Maya. This fight isn't just about today, it's about the long haul." Maya nodded, appreciating his words. "I know," she said softly, "but every step forward feels worth it. Every story we amplify, every change we push for, it matters." As they sat in the quiet of the office, the city lights twinkling outside the window, Maya felt a renewed sense of purpose. She wasn't just fighting for herself. She was fighting for a future where no one would have to experience what she had, where justice and fairness weren't ideals but realities. and for the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to believe that change was possible. Months later, the city felt different. Maya's relentless work alongside Marcus had sparked a wave of reforms. The police department, under immense public pressure, had begun implementing mandatory bias training and introducing policies aimed at increasing accountability. A civilian oversight board was formed to review complaints against officers, ensuring that voices like Maya's would no longer go unheard. The change wasn't just procedural, it was cultural. People in the community began to feel more empowered to speak out against injustice, knowing they had allies like Maya and Marcus on their side. Maya's work had also inspired individuals beyond the city. Her story had gained national attention, with media outlets covering her journey from that fateful encounter with Officer Carter to becoming a leading voice for reform. She was invited to speak at conferences, universities, and public forums, sharing her experience and advocating for systemic change. At one such event, Maya stood on stage in front of thousands, the spotlight illuminating her calm but determined face. She began her speech by recounting that pivotal day with Officer Carter. "That moment," she said, her voice steady, "was one of the most humiliating and frustrating experiences of my life. But it also taught me something important. Injustice thrives in silence. Speaking out, even when it's difficult, is the first step toward change." The audience erupted in applause, inspired by her resilience and vision. Maya continued, her voice growing stronger. "This isn't just my fight, it's all of ours. Together we can create a world where fairness isn't an exception, but the rule, where dignity is respected no matter who you are or what you look like." Meanwhile, Officer Carter's story took a different path. Stripped of his badge and facing public scrutiny, he began to reflect on his actions. For the first time, he was forced to confront the biases and assumptions that had shaped his decisions. While Maya's story was one of rising to new heights, Carter's was one of reckoning and, hopefully, redemption. In a rare interview, Carter admitted, "I made mistakes, big ones. I didn't see people for who they were. That day with Judge Brooks opened my eyes to the damage I was causing. It's something I'll carry with me for the rest of my life." Back in the city, Maya walked through the streets she had once traversed as a victim of injustice. This time she wasn't alone. She was surrounded by supporters, friends, and allies, all united by a shared commitment to building a better future. As she passed a mural painted in her honor, an image of her standing tall, surrounded by the words, "Justice, dignity, change," she paused. A young girl approached her, clutching a notebook and looking up with wide eyes. "Judge Brooks," the girl said shyly, "I want to be like you when I grow up." Maya knelt down, her smile warm and genuine. "You already have everything you need to make a difference," she said. "Never let anyone make you feel small. Your voice matters." The girl beamed, and Maya rose, her heart full. This was why she fought, for the next generation, for a world where stories like hers would no longer need to be told. As the sun set on the city, Maya stood at the edge of the courthouse steps, gazing out at the bustling streets below. The fight was far from over, but she knew they had made progress. And with every step forward, she carried the belief that justice was not just an ideal, but a reality worth striving for. In that moment, Maya wasn't just a judge, a victim, or a reformer. She was a symbol of hope, a reminder that one voice could spark a movement, and one act of courage could change the world.